In the heat of a Texas summer, Laura thought she had found her happily ever after. Married to a respected judge, she was ready to step into the life she had always dreamed of. But just 24 hours after their wedding, a shocking discovery would turn her world upside down. It was a hot Texas afternoon in mid-July when Laura Thompson, a vivacious 28-year-old with the kind of confidence that could light up a room, found herself standing in front of a packed courthouse. The air was thick, almost stifling, but Laura didn't notice. She was too caught up in the whirlwind that had become her life. The clock was ticking, her heart was pounding, and in just a few hours she would officially become the wife of the man she had been courting for only a short while. What had begun as a whirlwind romance in the heart of Austin had escalated quickly. Laura had met Will Walters, a 45-year-old divorced judge, at a charity event. He had swept her off her feet with his charisma, his deep voice, and the way he made her feel seen in a room full of people. She had never imagined she would marry someone like him. Tall, well-groomed, and wearing an aura of authority, Will was a respected figure in the Texas legal community. Their courtship had been quick, intense, and exhilarating. They traveled to places she had only dreamed of. Dinners at upscale restaurants, private getaways to the coast, and spontaneous trips to the mountains. It was the kind of romance that could make any woman feel like she was the star of her own love story. Will promised her everything she wanted, a life of luxury, stability, and respect. And, for a while, she believed him. The wedding was set for a late afternoon ceremony at a private estate in the hills just outside of Austin. Laura had been planning every detail meticulously. The dress, the venue, the guest list, all carefully selected. Will had chosen to keep things low-key, which only made Laura more eager to please him. There was no grandiose celebration. It was simply a small gathering of their closest friends and family. Yet, in her heart, Laura felt it was the beginning of something monumental. Little did she know, that very night would mark the end of everything she had hoped for. The ceremony had gone by in a blur. Will had stood at the altar, looking as though he belonged there. There was something about his demeanor, calm and collected, that made everyone around him feel at ease. He exchanged vows with Laura in front of their loved ones, promising her a life filled with love and understanding. Laura had smiled, beaming with the hope that she had finally found the one. The reception was small but elegant. Guests mingled, sipping on wine, laughing, and exchanging pleasantries. The night had felt perfect, almost surreal. As the evening wound down, Laura and Will retreated to their private suite in the estate. They were both tired, but their excitement was palpable. It was their first night as a married couple, and Laura was ready for what she believed would be the start of their intimate journey together. Will had been gentle and affectionate all night, kissing her softly on the lips, holding her hand as they walked through the house. But something about him had seemed off. There was an air of discomfort that she couldn't place. Still, she brushed it off, convinced that it was simply the nerves that came with the wedding. After a brief conversation, Will excused himself to the bathroom. Laura, now in her silk nightgown, stood by the window, looking out over the rolling hills that stretched as far as the eye could see. It was a peaceful sight, but as the clock ticked toward midnight, something inside her stirred. Her mind raced with questions. She had heard rumors, but they were just that, rumors. Gossip that couldn't be true. Yet, a part of her, deep down, couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she had missed, something important that she hadn't considered. When Will returned from the bathroom, the smile on his face was gone. He was quieter now, almost withdrawn. He moved toward her, but Laura could sense his hesitation. For the first time, she began to feel uncomfortable in his presence. She tried to shake off the feeling, convincing herself that it was just the aftermath of the wedding day. However, when the two of them began to undress for bed, Laura was struck by something unexpected. Will's body, the one that had once seemed so perfect, no longer seemed as alluring as she had imagined. She was trying to piece together the details in her mind, but nothing made sense. Will's body, from the waist down, seemed wrong. There was nothing overtly strange or alarming, but something was amiss. As she stood there in stunned silence, Will too seemed to notice her gaze. His face flushed, a visible discomfort creeping up on him. The air between them felt charged now, the weight of the unknown hanging in the room like a heavy fog. Laura swallowed hard, trying to force the words from her mouth, but she couldn't bring herself to ask the question that was now plaguing her thoughts. She had to know, but part of her was too afraid to hear the answer. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his head, avoiding her eyes, and quickly turned off the lights. He crawled into bed beside her, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Laura's heart pounded in her chest, the reality of what she had just witnessed settling in like a stone in her stomach. She had heard the stories, but she hadn't wanted to believe them. Not about the man she had married, not about Will, the man who had promised her everything. The next few hours were a blur. Laura lay wide awake, staring into the darkness, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had married him. This man who, in the light of day, appeared to be everything she had ever wanted. But now, in the quiet of their shared room, the truth began to take shape. Will had returned to his side of the bed, keeping a distance that spoke volumes. And as she lay there, Laura couldn't help but wonder how she had missed the signs. How had she failed to see the cracks that had begun to form even before they had exchanged vows? The truth was undeniable. Will, the man she thought she knew, had been hiding something far deeper than she had ever imagined. It wasn't the kind of thing Laura could ignore. Not now, not when she had as Will. Laura was not naive. She had spent her 20s dating, exploring relationships, and understanding her own desires. She had never been shy about discussing intimacy with friends, and she understood what was considered normal. The discrepancies, the hours stretched out as she wrestled with her emotions. She couldn't understand why Will had chosen to hide this from her. They had been so open about everything else, their dreams, their ambitions, their pasts. So why was this part of his life so carefully guarded? It seemed impossible to reconcile the confident, well-respected judge that everyone adored with the man she had woken up beside. Her mind, once clear, now felt like a fog of confusion. This was not the man she thought she had married. Her thoughts wandered. Eventually, she couldn't take it anymore. She needed answers, and as much as she hated to admit it, she knew that she couldn't live in this suffocating silence any longer. Will had to know how she felt. She had to confront him. It was the only way forward. She sat up in bed, her mind racing as she searched for the words to express the turmoil inside her. Will stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her with a softness that almost seemed out of place given the tension that filled the room. Laura didn't respond right away, instead staring at the wall in front of her. His gaze remained fixed on her, and she could sense the apprehension in his silence. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet and hesitant. "Laura, are you okay?" His words felt like a distant echo. They held no weight now. Laura had stopped believing in reassurances, not after the truth had been laid bare the night before. She wanted to turn to him, to explain how she felt, but the words refused to come out. How could she put into words the deep sense of betrayal she was experiencing? How could she explain that the very thing she had believed would connect them on a deeper level now felt like an insurmountable wall between them? She took a deep breath and shook her head. "I don't know if I am." The words came out softer than she expected, a mixture of sadness and disbelief. There it was. She had said it. She had finally admitted that something was wrong. It wasn't easy, but the weight of her emotions had become too heavy to ignore. She had to confront it, even if she had no idea where this would lead. Will's expression shifted. He had been bracing for this moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the rawness in her voice. For the first time, he seemed vulnerable, his composure slipping. It was as though he, too, had been waiting for the inevitable question to come. Laura's heart pounded as she turned to face him, her hands trembling. She had no idea what he would say, but she knew this was the only way to salvage whatever was left of their marriage. She was tired of pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "Will, she began, but the words faltered in her throat. She felt an overwhelming sense of loss, a grief she hadn't expected to experience so soon after their wedding day. He looked at her, his face a mask of guilt and regret. He took a deep breath, clearly trying to steady himself. "I never meant for you to find out like this," he said softly. Laura's eyes narrowed. "Find out? You never thought to tell me? All this time? I had no idea, Will. I had no idea." Her voice cracked, the emotion pouring out in a rush. She had spent weeks planning this perfect life, this future with him, and now it all felt like a cruel joke. He didn't say anything at first. His Laura's will seemed to shrink in front of her, his once confident demeanor dissolving into uncertainty. "I didn't mean for it to come to this. I thought maybe I could make it work without telling you." The silence between them grew heavier. Will had hoped that she wouldn't notice. He had hoped that their physical life would somehow work itself out, that his fears of inadequacy would stay hidden. But the truth had surfaced, and there was no going back. Laura's head spun as she processed his words. This wasn't a situation she could gloss over. She could forgive a lot of things, but this was different. This was a betrayal of the most intimate kind. She had always believed that honesty and transparency were the foundation of a strong relationship, and now that belief was in pieces on the floor before her. As the minutes ticked by, the reality of the situation set in. Laura knew that nothing could erase what had happened, nothing could unsee what she had seen. She had to face the facts. Her marriage had been built on a lie. The man she thought she knew was in fact someone entirely different. And as she sat there, confronting the truth, she realized that she had only one option left. One she never thought she'd be forced to take. She had to let him go. If you're enjoying this documentary, don't forget to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. The following morning, after the heavy conversation that had left both of them emotionally drained, Laura was no closer to understanding how she had ended up in this situation. Her life, once filled with promises of a happy future, had taken a sharp turn. The morning light seemed to mock her as it filtered through the blinds, the sun a reminder of the normal world that carried on, indifferent to her personal crisis. In a matter of hours, everything had changed. The dream of a loving marriage, the idea of growing old together with Will, had become nothing more than a mirage in the desert. She knew what she had to do. She had tried to find a way to make things work, to reconcile the image of Will she had grown to love with the reality of the man lying beside her, but the pain was too deep. His deceit, however unintentionally done, had shattered the very foundation of their relationship. How could she move forward with someone who had kept such a fundamental part of himself hidden? How could she ignore the feeling of betrayal that gnawed at her every waking moment? With trembling hands, Laura reached for her phone. Her heart beat rapidly in her chest, but she couldn't delay any longer. It was time to confront the situation head-on. She opened her messages, searching for the familiar name that had been her confidant through countless moments of doubt and fear. Anna, her best friend, was always there when she needed guidance. This time, though, it wasn't just about a bad day or an unfortunate argument. This was different. Laura's fingers hovered over the screen, typing and erasing her words as she struggled to convey the depth of what she was feeling. After several attempts, she finally sent the message. "I need to talk. I don't know what to do anymore." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Anna would know something was wrong. Laura sat back in the chair, staring at the phone as if waiting for some divine response. But there was no immediate answer. Her phone remained silent. The minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Will had left the house early that morning for work, his demeanor subdued, perhaps sensing that the end was near. Laura had not said a word to him after the conversation. She couldn't. What was left to say? The words had already been spoken, and there was nothing left but to decide what to do next. She tried to busy herself with mundane tasks around the house, but it felt like a poor attempt to mask the storm within her. The thought of calling her lawyer crossed her mind several times, but she hesitated. It felt too final. Could she really take that step? The notion of divorce, of ending her marriage just 24 hours after it had begun, felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But no matter how hard she tried, the reality of it couldn't be ignored. The trust between them had been irrevocably broken, and she could not continue living in a marriage where the core of their intimacy had been kept in the dark. As the day wore on, Anna finally replied. "What happened? Are you okay?" Laura hesitated, then typed out a response. "Will and we had a conversation this morning. He kept something from me, something huge. I can't stay married to him, not after this." The phone buzzed almost immediately. "Laura, I don't know what you're talking about. Tell me everything." With a deep breath, Laura started typing. She didn't know how to say it, how to make Anna understand, but she had to. She couldn't carry this alone anymore. He's not what I thought. There's a part of him, something I should have known, something I should have seen before. He's been hiding it, and now I can't pretend it doesn't exist. I don't know if I can trust him anymore. I don't know if I can ever look at him the same way again. The message was long, but it barely covered the depth of the situation. How could she explain the hurt that had built up inside her? How could she convey the profound sense of betrayal she felt by something so intimate, so personal? Anna responded quickly, her concern evident. Laura, this is a lot. You're telling me that this is about something physical. What happened exactly? You need to talk to him, really talk to him, before making any decisions. Laura's fingers paused over the screen as she read Anna's reply. There was a part of her that still wanted to believe everything would work out, that somehow the magic of their marriage would return, but another part of her knew that this wasn't just about a physical problem. This was about deception. This was about a relationship built on illusions. Laura closed her eyes, running her hands over her face. She needed to process this. She needed time. But as the day stretched into the afternoon, the clarity she sought became harder and harder to find. She knew what she had to do. There was no more running away from the truth. By the time Will returned home, Laura had already made her decision. She had already spoken to her lawyer, and the paperwork was being prepared. It wasn't something she could take back, no matter how much she might regret it later. The marriage, as it had been, was over. Will entered the house, his face drawn and tired. He looked at Laura for a moment, and she could feel the weight of his gaze, as if he too knew what was coming. He walked over to her, his steps slow, hesitant, like a man who had already lost the fight before it even began. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said, his voice strained. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Laura didn't look at him. Instead, she focused on the contract. "Will," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion. He was silent for a long time, and Laura didn't need to see his face to know that he was struggling. But it didn't matter. It couldn't matter. As Will stood there, unable to speak, Laura stood up, her back straight, her heart heavy with a finality she had never imagined she would experience. It wasn't the life she had envisioned when she said, "I do," but it was the life she had to accept. The truth had come to light, and with it, her resolve had solidified. She walked out of the room without another word, knowing there was nothing left to say. The next few days were a blur. The shock of it all, the finality of the decision, had left Laura in a state of quiet disbelief. The papers had been filed, and there was no turning back. Will had left the house, though not without a final desperate plea. His words still echoed in her mind, but they no longer held the power they once did. He had apologized over and over, blaming himself for everything. He spoke of regret and how he could change, but Laura knew that it wasn't about the apology. It wasn't about promises anymore. It was about trust. Something that had been irrevocably shattered. She spent the next few days in solitude, reflecting on the whirlwind of emotions that had overtaken her life. It wasn't just the fact that Will had hidden a part of himself from her, but that the man she had married wasn't the man she thought she knew. The betrayal ran deeper than she could have imagined. The secrets he had kept, the way he had hidden behind the veil of charm and appearances, left her questioning everything. Who was Will, really? Had their marriage been a lie from the start? The house, once filled with the joy of new beginnings, now felt eerily empty. The silence seemed to stretch for miles, filling every corner with an uncomfortable heaviness. There was no laughter, no shared moments of tenderness. The space felt too large for one person. She had been used to the rhythm of two people living under the same roof, the little things that made life feel like it had purpose. But now, those moments felt like memories from a different lifetime. As the phone calls from family and friends began to trickle in, but it wasn't just her parents who reached out. Anna, her best friend, had been an unwavering source of support. She'd dropped by the house several times to check in, bringing with her a comforting presence. Laura found solace in her company, though she couldn't escape the gnawing ache in her chest. Anna had been there from the beginning, watching as Laura had fallen for Will, and now she was there to pick up the pieces of a broken heart. "Take your time," Anna said one afternoon as they sat in Laura's living room, the weight of the conversation hanging between them. "You don't have to rush into any decisions. Whatever you decide, I know you'll make the right choice for you." Laura nodded, but deep down she wasn't so sure. What was the right choice? How could she ever trust anyone again? The betrayal she had experienced had left a scar, one that would take time to heal. She couldn't rush that process. Healing, she knew, had to happen at its own pace. The thought of moving on seemed impossible. Yet, as the days passed, Laura began to, for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to think about her own happiness. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to be the perfect partner, the loving wife, but in the process she had forgotten about herself. She had lost sight of her own needs and desires. The realization hit her hard. How had she allowed herself to fade into the background, to lose her voice in the cacophony of life? It wasn't easy. There were moments when the memories of her wedding day, of the promises as the divorce proceedings continued, Laura found herself gaining more control over her own destiny. She was no longer shackled by the decisions of another person. She had the freedom to make her own choice. Months passed, and the pain of the past began to fade into something more manageable. She learned to forgive herself, to stop blaming herself for the failure of her marriage. The guilt had been a heavy burden, but slowly she understood that she had done what Will, meanwhile, seemed to fade from her life as quickly as he had come into it. She didn't know what became of him, and frankly, she didn't care. He was a chapter that had closed, a person who no longer had a place in her future. She no longer wondered what might have been, or if she had made a mistake. What was done, and she was finally free. For the first time in a long time, Laura felt like she was living for herself again. There was a sense of peace in that, a peace she had longed for, but hadn't been able to find until now. The future was hers to shape, and she was determined to make it her own. If you were Laura, would you walk away, or would you stay and fight for answers? If you want to dive deeper into the twists and turns of this real-life thriller, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what comes next. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Let us know in the comments.